Get ready to witness a political showdown unlike anything you've seen before. A clash of ideologies that rocked the foundations of online discourse and left one prominent figure scrambling to pick up the pieces. This wasn't just a debate. It was a masterclass in how preparation can dismantle provocation, how facts can triumph over rhetoric, and how a quiet strength can humble the most audacious of bullies. Before we plunge into the heart of this electrifying confrontation, the moment Candace Owens walked onto a stage at Howard University, supremely confident she was about to deliver a career-defining blow to Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, only to instantly regret it, make sure you hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and like this video. And as you watch this story unfold, tell us in the comments, what do you think truly separates performance from persuasion in today's political arena? The air in Howard University's Crampton auditorium was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that promised more than just a polite political discussion. This was the future of black politics, billed as a showdown between two formidable women. On one side, strutting onto the debate stage with the unwavering confidence of someone who had never known defeat, was Candace Owens. Dressed in her signature vibrant red blazer, a sartorial declaration of her audacious presence, the 35-year-old conservative commentator exuded an aura of unshakable conviction. Her goal was singular, audacious, and broadcast to millions watching online, to utterly dismantle and publicly humiliate Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Owens, the architect of a brand built on owning the libs and fiercely defending Donald Trump, had meticulously planned this moment. With over 4 million followers on X, a daily podcast, and regular Fox News appearances, she had mastered the art of the viral moment, leveraging controversy into a potent currency. She saw this as her Daniel in the lion's den moment, a chance to deliver her unfiltered truth directly to what she termed the belly of the beast, a liberal black institution. Her documentary crew shadowed her every move, ready to capture her triumphant narrative, a film about bringing truth to indoctrinated students. She walked on, expecting to be a conquering hero. On the other side stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old former public defender from Texas. Unlike Owens's flamboyant arrival, Crockett's presence was measured, her demeanor composed. She was known not for manufactured outrage, but for her sharp wit and even sharper comebacks. Honed through years in congressional hearings and before that in the unforgiving crucible of the courtroom, defending those who couldn't afford a voice. Crockett hadn't built her career on viral soundbites. She had earned her seat by truly listening to her community. This wasn't just another debate for her, it was a homecoming. She had walked these same halls, sat in these same seats as a law student at Howard. Many of her former professors, mentors, and peers filled the packed auditorium of 2,500 people, adding an immense, personal weight to the stakes. The pressure to perform was immense, yet beneath her professional exterior lay the steely resolve of a woman who had faced down hostile judges and aggressive prosecutors for a living. The moderator, CNN's Abby Phillip, had barely finished her introductions when Candace Owens unleashed her first, calculated strike. "I'm standing in a building," Owens declared, gesturing around the hallowed auditorium, her voice dripping with carefully practiced contempt, "where young black minds are being poisoned daily with victimhood narratives, and Congresswoman Crockett is here to make sure that poison keeps flowing." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, quickly followed by a mix of boos and cheers. Owens savored the immediate controversy, the instant attention. This was her familiar dance. But then she caught Crockett's eye. The Congresswoman simply smiled. It was a calm, knowing smile, a subtle hint that this debate was, in fact, not going to unfold according to Candace Owens' meticulously crafted script. It should have been Owens' first stark warning that tonight, the rules of the game were about to change.
The initial shock of Candace Owens' plantation mentality broadside had barely settled when the debate truly ignited. Abby Phillip, the CNN moderator, moved swiftly to the first substantive topic, economic policy in black communities. Owens, impatient and eager to seize control, didn't even wait for the question to fully form. She launched into her pre-prepared assault, her voice rising with an almost theatrical indignation. The poverty rate in black communities has barely budged despite decades of Democratic control, she declared, brandishing what looked like meticulously culled statistics from her notes. Cities like Detroit, Baltimore, Chicago, all run by Democrats, all failing black families. And what does Congresswoman Crockett do? She votes for more of the same failed policies. She pivoted dramatically, her gaze locking on to Crockett. Tell me, Congresswoman, how do you sleep at night knowing you're perpetuating the very systems that keep black people poor? The audience stirred, a familiar pattern unfolding. This was the Candace Owens they knew from countless viral clips, aggressive, confrontational, ready for ideological warfare. A smattering of her supporters in the auditorium began chanting facts, facts, facts. But something profoundly different was happening among the Howard students. Rather than getting swept up in the emotion or erupting in a defensive uproar, they did something truly modern and utterly devastating to Owens' strategy. They pulled out their phones, not to record for immediate resharing of Owens' soundbites, but to fact-check. Within seconds, Twitter was ablaze with real-time corrections to Owens' statistics. A political science major, quick-witted and digitally agile, tweeted, "Owens just cited Baltimore poverty stats from 2010. Current data shows significant improvement under Democratic leadership." The tweet began circulating rapidly through the auditorium, passing from screen to screen, before Jasmine Crockett even stood up to respond. Jasmine, unhurried, slowly rose, adjusted her microphone, and spoke with a calm that belied the building tension. "Miss Owens," she began, her voice even and clear, "I sleep very well, actually. You know why? Because unlike you, I don't make my living by selling out my community for Fox News checks." The auditorium erupted. The raw, unfiltered truth of the accusation hit with immediate force. Owens's practiced smile wavered, her face tightening imperceptibly, but she quickly reverted to her well-worn defense. "There it is," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up theatrically. "When you can't debate facts, you attack the person. I'm a sellout because I dare to think differently? This is exactly the plantation mentality I'm talking about." She strutted across the stage, performing for her usual conservative crowds. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when you leave the Democratic Party. They don't debate your ideas, they attack your character. They can't handle a strong black woman who thinks for herself." But the script was failing. The expected roar of affirmation from her typical Turning Point USA events was replaced by a skeptical silence, punctuated by a few derisive laughs. A student in the front row visibly shook her head, and Owens caught it, her confidence wavering for a fleeting moment. But Crockett wasn't finished. "No, Miss Owens," she interjected, her voice firm. "You're not a sellout because you think differently. You're a sellout because you deliberately misrepresent data to attack your own people." She pulled out her own notes, a stack of prepared evidence. "Let's talk about those cities you mentioned." Her delivery was methodical, like a prosecutor building an irrefutable case. "Detroit, you failed to mention that under Democratic Mayor Mike Duggan, the city has seen its first population growth in 60 years. Baltimore, you didn't mention that Republican Governor Larry Hogan blocked numerous economic development plans for the city. Chicago, you conveniently ignored that the South and West sides you're talking about were devastated by Republican policies in the 80s and 90s that moved jobs overseas." Owens tried to interrupt, but Crockett cut her off, her momentum building. "But here's what really interests me, Miss Owens. You talk about Democratic failures, but you've never once mentioned Republican successes in black communities. Can you name a single Republican policy from the last 30 years that specifically helped black Americans? Just one?" The audience fell into a profound silence. This wasn't how Candace Owens debates usually went. This was the moment the performance began to crack. The profound silence that followed Crockett's challenge. "Can you name a single Republican policy from the last 30 years that specifically helped black Americans?" Just one, hung heavy in the air. Owens, usually quick with a retort, fumbled. Her carefully constructed facade of factual superiority had crumbled under the weight of Crockett's methodical precision. With her rhetorical weapons blunted, Owens resorted to the only tactic left in her arsenal: the personal attack.
Desperation etched itself onto her features, a stark contrast to her earlier swagger. At least I'm not taking money from George Soros and radical left organizations like you are, Congresswoman, she spat, her voice laced with venom. How much did they pay you to be their token? The energy in the room shifted palpably. Several audience members gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath at the sheer audacity of the accusation. Crockett's expression, however, transformed, not into anger, as Owens surely expected, but into something akin to genuine pity. "Miss Owens," Crockett began slowly, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "I want you to repeat what you just said. You just called me a token. Is that correct?" Owens, sensing perhaps that she had overstepped, yet too deeply entrenched in her confrontational persona to back down, doubled down with a defiant sneer. "If the shoe fits, you're doing exactly what your white liberal donors want you to do." Crockett nodded slowly, deliberately. "Interesting. So in your world, any black person who disagrees with you is either brainwashed or bought? There's no possibility that we've looked at the evidence and come to different conclusions?" Owens, sensing a momentary opening, shot back. "What evidence? The evidence that Democratic policies have failed? The evidence that welfare has destroyed the black family? The evidence that—" "The evidence," Crockett interrupted, her voice rising for the first time with an edge of righteous indignation, "that you've built your entire career on YouTube videos and Twitter arguments while some of us were actually in the trenches doing the work. I spent 10 years as a public defender, Miss Owens, 10 years defending black men and women who were targeted by a criminal justice system that your Republican friends made worse with every tough-on-crime bill. Where were you?" The Howard students, a restless energy now coursing through them, began to applaud. Even some of the conservative attendees looked visibly uncomfortable with the raw personal honesty of Crockett's challenge. Owens tried to regain control, stammering, "I was waking people up to the truth while you were part of the system. I was exposing it." "No," Crockett said firmly, her gaze unwavering. "You were making videos for white conservatives who love hearing a black woman tell them they're not racist. You were building a brand on the backs of the very people you claim to want to help. And now you want to come to Howard University, to this sacred ground, and lecture us about plantations?" The tension was electric, almost suffocating. Owens' hands were visibly shaking as she gripped her microphone. This was not going according to plan. She had anticipated anger, emotion, perhaps some accusations of racism she could easily dismiss. She had not, however, expected to be systematically dissected like this, calmly and forensically, in front of an audience that was supposed to be impressed by her boldness. Crockett pulled out a tablet. "Let's talk about your record, shall we?" Her voice was now a low, dangerous purr like a predator closing in. "In 2015, you ran a website called Degree 180 that published articles criticizing Donald Trump. You called him a monster and warned about his disturbing behavior toward women. But in 2017, suddenly you're his biggest defender. What changed, Miss Owens? Did Trump become less a monster, or did you discover that defending him was more profitable?" Owens' face, which had been flushed with anger, now went pale. This was ancient history, skeletons she had hoped were buried deep beneath layers of carefully curated controversy. "People evolve," she said weakly, her voice thin. "I saw the light about—" "You saw the checks," Crockett interrupted, delivering the line with devastating precision. "Your speaking fees went from nothing to $50,000 per appearance once you became a black woman who defends Trump. Your social media following exploded. You went from nobody to a somebody by telling white conservatives exactly what they wanted to hear. And you have the audacity to accuse me of being bought?" She turned to the audience, encompassing them in her powerful indictment. "This is what grifting looks like, Howard. Someone who will say anything, betray anyone, abandon any principle for fame and fortune. Miss Owens wants to talk about plantations. She's not trying to free anyone. She's just trying to convince you that her plantation has better benefits." The air crackled with the force of her words, and Candace Owens visibly recoiled, her performance rapidly unraveling before the transfixed crowd.
The brutal indictment of grifting still hung in the air, leaving Candace Owens visibly shaken, her performance rapidly disintegrating. Desperate to regain any semblance of control, she pivoted, clutching at one of her most reliable talking points, a favorite among her base: education. She launched into a well-rehearsed tirade, her voice regaining a forced bravado. The biggest scam perpetrated on Black Americans is the idea that more education funding equals better outcomes, Owens declared, pointing emphatically. Baltimore spends over $16,000 per student and still has some of the worst schools in America. The problem isn't money, it's a victim mentality that Democrats like Congresswoman Crockett promote. She pulled out her phone, waving it theatrically at the audience, as if brandishing an undeniable weapon. "I have the data right here. Would you like me to read it, Congresswoman, or are facts too inconvenient for your narrative?" Crockett, however, merely offered that same calm, knowing smile from the beginning, the one that should have warned Owens this entire endeavor was doomed. "Please read your data, Miss Owens," Crockett replied, her voice soft, almost inviting. "I'm very interested to hear it." Owens, momentarily believing she had gained the upper hand, began to read from her phone, her voice regaining a confident cadence. Baltimore City Public Schools, $16,400 per pupil spending, 13% efficiency in math, 16% in reading. The numbers don't lie, Congresswoman. "You're right," Crockett said, her voice still calm, but now with an underlying steel. "The numbers don't lie, but you do." A collective, audible gasp swept through the auditorium. Owens' face flushed a deeper red, her jaw tightening. "Excuse me? You cited the pupil spending correctly, but you deliberately left out crucial context. First, that $16,400 includes special education costs, transportation, and building maintenance for schools that are, on average, 47 years old. When you look at actual instructional spending, money that goes directly to teaching, Baltimore ranks 47th out of 50 major cities." She wasn't finished. "Second, you failed to mention that Maryland's Republican Governor Larry Hogan withheld $2.9 billion in already approved education funding from Baltimore. Third, you didn't mention that many Baltimore schools lack basic resources like heat, air conditioning, or safe drinking water. But please tell me more about how money doesn't matter when kids are learning in 90-degree classrooms." Owens tried to respond, but Crockett's voice grew stronger, carrying the undeniable weight of truth. "You know what's really interesting, Miss Owens? You went to Stamford High School in Connecticut. Average per-pupil spending there, $19,000. Your school had Olympic-sized pools, state-of-the-art technology, and college counselors for every student. But now you want to tell kids in Baltimore that money doesn't matter? That's not—" "I didn't," Owens stammered, clearly thrown off her game. "And speaking of your background," Crockett continued, now in full prosecutor mode, her gaze piercing, "didn't you receive financial aid to attend the University of Rhode Island? Didn't you benefit from programs designed to help students afford college, but now you oppose those same programs for other Black students?" The crowd was fully, unequivocally on Crockett's side now, a wave of murmurs transforming into a rising tide of applause. Some people were actually standing up. Owens looked around desperately, searching for friendly faces, but even her staunchest supporters looked uncomfortable. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Owens cried, her voice cracking slightly. "Personal attacks instead of addressing the issues." "Personal attacks?" Crockett laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Miss Owens, you called me a token and a plantation overseer. You've built your entire career on personal attacks against Black leaders, Black institutions, and Black communities. But the moment someone examines your record, suddenly you want civility?" She pulled out her tablet again, and the audience leaned forward, riveted. "Let's talk about your record, shall we? In 2015, you ran a website called Degree 180 that published articles criticizing Donald Trump. You called him a monster and warned about his disturbing behavior toward women. But in 2017, suddenly you're his biggest defender. What changed, Miss Owens? Did Trump become less a monster, or did you discover that defending him was more profitable?" Owens' face went from red to a ghostly pale. This was ancient history. Skeletons, she had hoped, were buried deep beneath layers of carefully curated controversy. People evolve, she said weakly, her voice thin. I saw the light about... You saw the checks, Crockett interrupted, delivering the line with devastating precision. Your speaking fees went from nothing to $50,000 per appearance once you became a black woman who defends Trump. Your social media following exploded. You went from a nobody to a somebody by telling white conservatives exactly what they wanted to hear. And you have the audacity to accuse me of being bought? She turned to the audience, encompassing them in her powerful indictment. This is what grifting looks like, Howard. Someone who will say anything, betray anyone, abandon any principle for fame and fortune. Miss Owens wants to talk about plantations. She's not trying to free anyone. She's just trying to convince you that her plantation has better benefits. The devastating blow, the true knockout punch, came when Crockett pulled up something else on her tablet. Miss Owens, she began, her voice dropping to an ice-cold whisper, a stark contrast to the emotional fervor of the room. You recently tweeted that George Floyd died of a drug overdose, not police brutality. You said, and I quote, "The media lied about everything." Do you stand by that statement? Owens shifted uncomfortably, a hunted look in her eyes. This was a trap, and she knew it. If she backed down, she'd lose credibility with her base. If she doubled down, she'd lose any remaining shred of humanity with this audience. I believe in following the facts wherever they lead, she said carefully, her voice barely a whisper. The facts? Crockett's voice was now a razor's edge. The facts are that Dirk Chauvin was convicted of murder by a jury of his peers. The facts are that multiple medical examiners confirmed that George Floyd died from cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement's subdual, restraint, and neck compression. The facts are that we all watched a man beg for his mother while a police officer kneeled on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. She paused, letting the crushing weight of her words sink into the absolute silence of the auditorium. You could hear someone crying softly in the back rows. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, transfixed by the sheer gravity of the moment. But you, Miss Owens, you looked at those facts and decided to defend the murderer. You decided that your brand, your followers, your speaking fees were more important than the truth for a black man who called out for his mama while he died. And you want to lecture us about moral courage? A Howard student, tears streaming down her face, slowly rose in the audience and began to clap. Then another, then another. Within seconds, half the auditorium was on their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Not a performance, but a raw, emotional outpouring for someone who had finally said what needed to be said. The auditorium was deafeningly silent once more as the applause subsided. Even the moderator, Abby P., seemed stunned by the thoroughness of Crockett's dismantling. Owens stood there, microphone hanging limply at her side, seemingly unable to form a response. Finally, desperately, she tried one last attack. At least I'm not afraid to stand alone. At least I don't need the approval of the liberal establishment. You're just another Democrat politician who will say anything to get elected. Crockett shook her head slowly. Miss Owens, I don't stand alone. I stand with my community. I stand with the families I represented as a public defender. I stand with the constituents who elected me to fight for them. You stand with whoever pays you the most. There's a difference between being independent and being for sale. She delivered the final blow with surgical precision. You know what the saddest part is? You're actually smart. You're articulate. You could have used your platform to have real conversations about real issues facing black communities. Instead, you chose to be a performance artist, playing a character for an audience that will never truly respect you. They love you not because of what you say, but because of who you are when you say it. Their black friend who tells them they're not racist. The crowd erupted, people on their feet, some cheering, others simply stunned by what they had just witnessed. Owens looked like she'd been physically hit, her usual confident smirk replaced by something that looked like almost panic. I think we need to take a commercial break, Abby P. said, her voice strained, clearly trying to give Owens a moment to recover. But the damage was done. As they cut to commercial, the clip was already going viral. Hashtag Crockett Destroys Owens was trending before they even came back from break. Screenshots of Owens' shock face were becoming memes in real time. The conservative commentator who had made her name destroying libs had just been systematically dismantled on live television.
When the broadcast returned from commercial, something fundamental had shifted. Candace Owens, who had strutted onto the stage like a conquering hero, now looked smaller, diminished. Her eyes darted nervously around the auditorium, betraying her internal turmoil, as she no doubt saw the real-time social media explosion happening on her phone. Her makeup artist had rushed over during the break, powdering a face that now showed the unmistakable strain, beads of sweat forming despite the chill of the air conditioning. Her team, frantic and whispering, had likely urged her to salvage something from this unmitigated disaster. But how do you recover from being so thoroughly exposed, so clinically dismantled? How do you spin being fact-checked with your own words? How do you reconstruct a career narrative that has just been deconstructed on live television? The documentary crew that had so eagerly filmed her triumphant procession earlier in the day had quietly, almost imperceptibly, stopped rolling, recognizing that this was not the heroic film they had envisioned. The remaining portion of the debate was painful to watch. Owens tried to return to her familiar talking points, but they fell flat, hollow echoes in the now skeptical auditorium. Every accusation she made was met with the collective memory of how Crockett had fact-checked her earlier. Every time she claimed to speak for black people, the devastating George Floyd comments lingered in the air. Every attack on Democrats brought to mind her own undeniable flip-flopping on Donald Trump. Crockett, for her part, didn't pile on unnecessarily. Her point had been made with devastating clarity. When asked about criminal justice reform, she spoke passionately about her experience as a public defender. When asked about economic policy, she laid out specific plans with specific funding mechanisms. She was doing something Owens couldn't, actually discussing policy instead of just throwing rhetorical bombs. The most telling moment came near the very end, when an audience member asked both women what they hoped to accomplish in the next 5 years. Owens gave a rambling, aimless answer about waking people up and exposing the truth, but it sounded utterly hollow now, a transparent attempt to run out the clock. Crockett's answer was starkly different, imbued with substance and a genuine vision. In 5 years, she said, her voice resonant with conviction, I want to look back and see that I've helped pass legislation that actually improves people's lives. I want to see criminal justice reform that keeps our communities safe while ending mass incarceration. I want to see economic policies that create real opportunities, not just tax breaks for the wealthy. And I want to see a new generation of black leaders who aren't afraid to challenge anyone, Democrat or Republican, who isn't serving our interests. She paused, then looked directly at Owens, her gaze unwavering. I also hope that in 5 years we can have honest conversations about our differences without resorting to calling each other slaves or tokens. We can disagree without disrespecting our ancestors who actually were enslaved. We can debate policy without performing for audiences who don't have our best interests at heart. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One woman was building, the other was burning. One had vision, the other had viral moments. One had substance, the other had slogans. As the debate officially ended, something unprecedented occurred. Owens, who typically lingered to take selfies with fans and give impromptu interviews, quickly exited the stage, practically fleeing the auditorium. Her team hustled her out a side door, desperately avoiding the media scrum that was already forming. Crockett, meanwhile, stayed for over an hour, talking to students, answering questions, taking pictures. She wasn't gloating or celebrating, she was simply doing what she had always done, connecting with her community. The social media aftermath was swift and brutal. #Crockett destroys Owens became the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The video clip of the debate, particularly the moment Crockett exposed Owens flip-flopping on Trump, spread like wildfire. Memes proliferated, with Owens' shocked face becoming the new symbol for picking a fight with the wrong person. The conservative media tried desperately to spin it. Fox News barely covered the debate, and when they did, they showed only carefully curated clips of Owens' opening statements. The Daily Wire published an article claiming Crockett had been unnecessarily aggressive and refused to engage with facts. But even Owens' usual defenders seemed half-hearted. Ben Shapiro tweeted some mild support, but notably didn't share any clips from the actual debate. Tucker Carlson, who had previously featured Owens dozens of times, remained conspicuously silent,
When pressed by his audience to comment, he deflected with a segment on a completely different topic. The message was clear. Even Owens' most powerful allies recognized this as an unrecoverable disaster. They wanted no part of it. Meanwhile, the mainstream media couldn't get enough of the story. CNN replayed the key moments on a loop. MSNBC brought in panels to discuss the changing face of political debate. Even international outlets picked up the story, with the BBC running a segment titled "When Performance Politics Meets Preparation." The View dedicated an entire episode to the debate, with Whoopi Goldberg delivering a memorable line. "This is what happens when you mistake being loud for being right. That young woman came with receipts, and Candace came with rhetoric." The most interesting reactions, however, came from black conservatives who had previously supported Owens. Some began openly questioning whether she truly represented their views or was just playing a character. "I'm conservative, but Crockett was right about one thing," one black Republican tweeted. "We need to be able to discuss policy without the plantation rhetoric. It's disrespectful and it doesn't convince anyone." Owens tried damage control the next day, posting a heavily edited video on her YouTube channel showing only her best moments from the debate, but the internet had already seen the full version. The comment section, usually a safe space for her supporters, was full of people posting timestamps from the real debate. "Show the part where she fact-checked you about Baltimore," read one top comment. "Show the part about George Floyd," read another. She then tried a different approach, claiming on her podcast that the debate had been rigged and that Howard University had stacked the audience against her. But this only made her look worse, like a sore loser who couldn't accept defeat. Even some conservative commentators pushed back. One said on their show, "Candace knew what she was walking into. You can't claim victimhood after you called your opponent a plantation overseer." The real impact, though, went beyond social media drama. The debate had exposed something important about the current state of political discourse. For years, people like Owens had built their careers on owning opponents with quick comebacks and viral moments. They mistook performance for persuasion, controversy for courage. But when faced with someone who had done their homework, who had facts and receipts, and real-world experience, the performance fell apart. Political science professors began using the debate as a teaching tool. One Harvard professor told his class, "This is what happens when rhetoric meets reality." Owens had talking points, Crockett had knowledge. In a real debate, knowledge wins. The impact on Crockett's career was immediate. Her congressional office reported a massive increase in constituent calls, mostly supportive. Donations to her re-election campaign spiked. More importantly, she had proven that you could stand up to bad faith attacks without stooping to the attacker's level. She had shown that preparation beats provocation every time. Other Democratic politicians took notice. Within days, several announced they would accept debate challenges from conservative commentators they had previously ignored. "Jasmine showed us we don't have to be afraid of these people," one congressman said. "They're bullies, and bullies fall when you stand up to them." For Owens, the aftermath was more complicated. Her core white conservative audience still supported her, but her influence in broader conversations about race and politics had taken a serious hit. Speaking requests from universities dried up after the Howard debacle. Few schools wanted to risk similar embarrassment. Her attempts to challenge other black Democrats to debates were declined or ignored. The most telling sign of the impact came 3 weeks later. Owens, who had built her brand on fearlessness and never backing down, quietly deleted several old tweets attacking black Democrats as plantation slaves. She didn't announce it or apologize, they just disappeared. When asked about it by a follower, she blocked them. But the internet never forgets. Screenshots of the deleted tweets began circulating with a caption, "Looks like someone learned their lesson." The Daily Beast ran an article titled, "Candace Owens' Great Deletion," documenting how she removed not just tweets, but entire videos where she'd used the plantation rhetoric. Her YouTube channel quietly underwent a content purge, with at least a dozen older videos disappearing without explanation. Even more telling was what happened behind the scenes. According to sources close to her team, Owens had a series of heated meetings with her management and sponsors. Several corporate speaking engagements were postponed indefinitely. A planned book tour was scaled back from 30 cities to just 10, all in deeply conservative markets. The title of her upcoming book was quietly changed from "Leaving the Democrat Plantation" to the more generic Think for yourself. A month after the debate, Jasmine Crockett gave an interview reflecting on what had happened. "I didn't go there to destroy anyone," she said. "I went there to have a serious conversation about serious issues. But when someone comes at you with lies and disrespect, you have to respond with truth and facts. That's what I did." When asked if she'd debate Owens again, Crockett smiled. "She knows where to find me. But next time, I hope she comes prepared to actually discuss policy instead of just throwing out insults. Our community deserves better than performance art. We deserve real solutions." The interview went viral, too, for different reasons. People appreciated that Crockett wasn't gloating or dancing on Owens' reputation. She had won decisively, but was still focused on work, not the victory. This is bigger than just one debate or two people. It's about how we discuss politics in America. For too